Hi BookTube, and welcome to a Friday Read. It's being recorded late Friday evening, so hopefully I can get this posted while it's still Friday. A couple of books, Interior Chinatown by American author Charles Yu, and The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, which was nominated and shortlisted, I think, for both the Man Booker International and the Fiction in Translation, or Literature in Translation Prize this year. I'm going to start with Charles Yu. So Willis Wu is an American of Asian origin, and his father was what was called Kung Fu Guy. And the world of this book is ostensibly within Hollywood film and TV, and American Asians are completely relegated to bit part actors and extras under generic names, such as Coolie or Old Wise Guy, or in this case the highest role they can get is Kung Fu Guy. And Willis's dad achieved it, but it didn't bring him all the gifts that he thought it would, including assimilation into being an American citizen. And his older brother also was on that path to be Kung Fu Guy, and then sort of up to the left. But it's still Willis's ambition, and he's climbing the role ladder of sort of these bit parts to hopefully end up being Kung Fu Guy. And he's in this cop show with a black male policeman and a white female policeman, and they have this sort of sizzling relationship that never is quite consummated, and that drives the sort of the romantic tension drives it. And he's a special guest star as Kung Fu Guy. Now, all this ostensibly, as I say, takes place within the world of hot TV and film, but I think it's consciously a wider. It's actually in society itself that there's a glass ceiling to any ambition for someone of Asian American origin, and that they are only seen in these very limited roles in real life. Otherwise they are erased and effaced. They're not white, obviously. They don't have the history of slavery behind them. They form a third sort of category of alien and immigrant. And parts in this book, there's Yu provides, the legislative prohibition on immigration from Asia at various times in the 19th century. And they suffered a lot of the lack of rights that freed slaves did in terms of voting and stuff. But there were quotas on how many could enter America from countries like China, etc., etc. And this book is described as clever and funny, and it's definitely clever. I mean, it's a brilliant sort of extended metaphor of these sort of limited roles that American Asians can fulfil. But the notion of humour is an interesting one. I didn't find it funny until the very last section, which was a court case, and I'll come to that. I think if you find it funny, you are finding the stereotypes funny, and that makes you play into them and sort of acknowledge them and recognise them on some level. But if you then find that funny, or it amuses you, it puts you, the reader, in quite a difficult position. I mean, it's a deliberate gauntlet thrown in your face by you, Charles Yu, not you, that we are all complicit in this, or at least the whites are complicit in this. And if you find it funny, well, you dreamt up those stereotypes in the first place, and you're sort of laughing in a sort of self-pleased way. So it's a brilliant sort of structure. But I think it puts the reader, as I say, deliberately, it makes it uncomfortable for the reader if the reader finds himself laughing. Until the very last section, as I say, which is a court case, which Willis Wu is having to fight, and his older brother has returned to represent him because he's trained as a lawyer, i.e. an American lawyer, no glass ceiling for him, because he's abandoned the Kung Fu Guy aspiration. He's trained at, I can't remember if it's Harvard or wherever, to become a lawyer, and has become a lawyer like any aspirational American, and has he assimilated though? Well, his argument on behalf of his brother shows that no, he hasn't assimilated. He's a firebrand. He's throwing out big ideas and stuff. So this is part of his presentation to the court, the older brother's presentation to the court. They zoned us, kept us roped off from everyone else, trapped us inside, cut us off from our families, our history. So we made it our own place, Chinatown, a place for preservation and self-preservation. Give them what they feel is right, is safe. Make it fit their ideas of what is out there. Don't threaten them. Chinatown, and indeed being Chinese, is and always has been from the very beginning a construction, a performance of features, gestures, culture and exoticism, an invention, a reinvention, a stylisation, figuring out the show, finding our place in it, which was the background, as scenery, as non-speaking players, figuring out what you're allowed to say, above all trying to never ever offend, to watch the mainstream, find out what kind of fiction they are telling themselves, find a bit part in it, be appealing and acceptable, be what they want to see. My client was a part of this system, both victim and suspect. He killed countless Asian men. Gasps from the gallery. Killed them and then 6 weeks later became them again, as if nothing had happened, as if he had no memory or remorse. He allowed it to happen, allowed himself to become generic, so that no one could even tell what was happening. He is guilty, Your Honour, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, guilty of wanting to be part of something that never wanted him. The defence rests. So I think, that's a good summation of the argument of this book, that if your character was killed in the cop show or whatever, you could not get any more work for 6 weeks. With all this sort of inconvenience in terms of getting paid and stuff, you had to wait it out before you were then resurrected in exactly the same guise as a supporting bit actor. But in case people who watched the show remembered your face, or might remember your face, then you had to wait 6 weeks. So that was sort of one of the little prejudices. And another is, any time you went for an audition or a real speaking role in the real world, nothing to do with acting, and because you had been you'd assimilated yourself in your own mind and you spoke without an accent, often the casting people would say, no, do the accent, we need the accent, because again, that is part of the preconception of the stereotype. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in here, and I think really, really well done. And I gave it 4 stars out of 5. And on to The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. Now, I'd studiously avoided this book when all the hoo-ha came out, and it was getting talked about everywhere. It was on 2 different prize lists, as I say. I was afraid that this was going to be a genre work, or revolved around memory, or that memory was just a plot device. And to be fair to the book, it's not. It's neither. I think it is a meditation on memory, but the problem is it's not literary enough if it's a pure meditation on memory. I'm not saying it has to be Proust, but it's not literary enough. Neither is it a genre book. It's a notional dystopia, but that's not really what it's about. People compare it to 1984 because the memory police are quite totalitarian, but it's not about them. It's about the central characters losing their memories, and I'll explain how that works. And towards the end, the memory police fade away entirely. So that again just suggests that it's about the internal story of the individual. It's not a state sort of run thing that the book is focusing on, like Orwell's 1984. So there's an island of 2, the southern island, so presumably it's a sort of putative Japan, and things disappear one by one. And when we say they disappear, one day, after a night's sleep, all the citizens wake up and they know that something else has disappeared. And once they establish what it is, they have to bring every item of that thing. So let's say it's an apple. They have to bring all the apples that they own to the memory police for destruction. And that somehow, gradually, even the word apple will disappear from their memory because they have nothing to refer to it on a sort of visual material sense. So the first thing to say is they're complicit because they are bringing all of these items for destruction. They don't question why it is. We don't know why it, the memory police seem to be the authorities because they are policing whether, these things are eradicated from society or not. Is there a higher power than the memory police? We don't know. The memory police seem to be self-serving because they don't seem to go without these items as far as we can tell. But what's the logic? Is it just power for power's sake that they snap their fingers and say, okay, from tomorrow this will disappear, and all the citizens carry it out because such is the power of the memory police? Well, that's fine. That's a perfectly legitimate sort of thing to explore. But as I say, this isn't about the memory police. This is about the people gradually sort of losing grasp and memory of item by item by item. But if you're building that world, it has to have logical consistency. And the problem with this book is there are too many incoherences within that. So this is page 2, where while her mother is still alive, her mother is preserving these forbidden items because she's a sculptress and she has a much more sort of existential, sort of transcendental relationship with these things. So of the 3 things that her, she has this sort of huge set of drawers, and every day her daughter picks a different drawer, and her mother and she explore what these items are. So this is page 4, but essentially page 2. These are the items that were in that drawer. This is a kind of fabric called ribbon that was disappeared when I was just 7 years old. You used to tie your hair up or decorate a skirt. And this was called a bell. Give it a shake, it makes a lovely sound. Oh, you've chosen a good drawer today. That's called an emerald. It's the most precious thing I have. It's a keepsake from my grandmother. They're beautiful and terribly valuable, and at one point they were the most highly prized jewels on the island, but their beauty has been forgotten now. So that's how the book starts. And yet, we get this. I ought to say that the narrator is a younger woman who's also a novelist, and she is writing a novel. We get lots of that novel that she's writing in here. And while it sort of mirrors the theme of disappearance and loss, I don't really see what it brings. Too much of the novel within a novel is represented. And as I say, there are echoes, but I don't think we need that much of the novel that she's writing in here. I can't see to what end it is. So this is on page 57. This is from the novel that she's writing. At the sight of the ribbon snaking through the typewriter from one spool to the other, the students heaved a collective sigh of relief. Well, page 4 said there's no such thing as a ribbon. Now, admittedly, a clothing or a hair ribbon or a bonnet ribbon is not the same as a typewriter ribbon, but this is my point. The word ribbon should disappear along with the ribbon that has been prohibited. And yes, a typewriter ribbon is not something you tie in your hair or whatever. But this is an ambiguity that I think she's failed to spot. Now, perhaps in Japanese, a typewriter ribbon has a different word to a clothing ribbon. I don't know. But it's an issue for me that, first of all, we're not clear how these objects, disappear from memory. I mean, the mother is able to preserve the memories because she's preserved the objects. But part of it explicitly is that without these physical visual prompts, the word disappears as well. And clearly it doesn't. And another example of this, about halfway through the book, fruit disappears. All fruit is brought for destruction. And yet, again, in the novel that she's writing, and you could say, yes, well, the character is writing the novel to preserve these things in the same way as the mother preserved the physical manifestations of them. She's preserving the linguistic versions of them, even though she herself can't remember words for things that have disappeared in her own lifetime. First of all, the materials themselves are strange. Vinyl, paper, metal, leaves, fruit peels. Again, fruit has disappeared. The word fruit should disappear, so she shouldn't be able to write the word fruit peels, but she does. And this happens throughout. It's not just fruit and ribbons. I took a book with a P. So one of the future things that they go on to burn is novels, which obviously poses a problem for her because that's her job. But they take, she preserves some novels, I assume including her own, in a secret compartment where she's storing her editor, because her editor still has the power to remember beyond things disappearing, unlike her and other characters. And these are the people that the memory police hunt down. So she's basically secreting her editor in a secret room in her house. But so she leaves some books with him, but she takes the rest of her novels in her collection to be burnt. I took a book with a pea green cover decorated with a picture of fruit. No, you didn't, because fruit has ceased to exist, and yet, of course, picture of fruit can still exist, because it's overlooked by, it's not been, you haven't made the connection between a picture of fruit with actual fruit. And if the memory police had discovered that in her house, they probably would have punished her for it, because she probably should have got rid of it. So, this is this sort of ambiguity all the way through of how this works. And as I say, they're complicit with it, because they bring this stuff for destruction. And gradually we move from external objects to body parts. This is where I think she's trying to make a point about the narrator musing on memory and loss of self when the whole community start losing body parts. But, by that stage, the whole thing had got ridiculous, really. So there's also an earthquake that happens. It's a shame the memory police couldn't make earthquakes disappear, but that's bigger than even their powers. And she rescues not the guy in a room, but someone who's very protective of her, an old man, and he lives on a sort of disused ferry boat, because ferries have been disappeared. And an earthquake hits, and then he's trapped on this boat as things have collapsed on top of him. He goes, no, save yourself, because the tsunami will follow. She doesn't know what a tsunami is, but anyway, so she does save him, and he's clinging up. He's lost all his possessions, but the only thing he's clinging on to is a music box which the editor gave him, which is obviously long since disappeared and outlawed. So she asks him, why did you bring the music box? I don't know. It was under me when I was pinned by the cabinet, but I have no idea how I managed to get it here. Clutched in my hand, I suppose, or shoved in a pocket. I'm glad you were able to save something. The only thing I brought with me was Don, which is a dog she's rescued. But Don is most important of all. An old man like me doesn't need much. I don't mind that everything was washed away, and besides, the ferry itself had disappeared a long time ago. Well, that's all very well and good, but they don't know the fate of Rob, of the guy in her secret room, and her editor and her lover. They're talking about keepsakes that they've saved. What about the fate of this guy in her house? If her house has collapsed on top of him, he's sort of trapped anyway. He cannot leave that room. But if it's all collapsed, that seems to pass them by. The internal logic of this book did not work at all. We never know what happens to the people who were carted off by the memory police for infractions of memory. This is a sort of casual vegetable seller who appealed to her to sort of find her a safe house. And of course her safe house is already filled with her editor, so she sort of knocks her back. A week later she suddenly vanished, and I had no way of knowing whether she had run out of vegetables to sell, or had moved on to a different spot, or had found a place to hide, or if she had been caught by the memory police. Well, neither do we, and it's never resolved. And that's the thing, there's a lot of ends that are never tied up here. And I think frustratingly so to me as a reader. We don't know why things are disappearing. We can maybe read into it that it's power for the sake of power by the memory police. We don't know what motivates the memory police. They fade away as body parts disappear from everybody, like a left leg or a right arm or whatever. They don't have to do their work because people can't disguise the fact that their body parts aren't there anymore. It makes no sense. Even the fact that her editor R could remember everything, he's trying to encourage her to cast back and remember the things that have disappeared, because she stopped writing novels because they have disappeared. And as her editor, he's trying to get her to carry on, to take it up again. But she cannot summon from herself where these sort of erasures in her memory have been. And he keeps appealing to, love and the spirit and beauty, you know, to inspire her to write again, but none of them really work. And then randomly towards the end, she does finish the novel that she was writing, and we're not sure what prompted her to finish it, but anyway, okay. And it's very much mirroring the sort of self-erasure of the real world that she lives in here. But there's an element of Stockholm syndrome in that again, I say, you know, that the character in her novel is complicit, you know, is held as a prisoner. She, you know, she can't speak. She used to communicate by typewriter, and then her typewriter seized up. And then that's taken as you know, the man she loves is the typewriter teacher, and he sort of captured her voice in the typewriter. When it's reached such a pitch, their relationship, he basically not breaks the typewriter, but it stops working. He's like captured her voice and locks her up in a clock tower. And eventually, she has Stockholm syndrome, so she's sort of happy to disappear into that room. She doesn't find, you know, she started off finding what he did as, you know, predatory and stuff, but in the end she accepts it. So she's complicit the same way as the citizens are complicit. So I think there is a gendered meditation on female loss and sacrifice, but it didn't work for me. It really didn't work for me, because the world in which all that takes place is incoherent. And yeah, so that's all I have to say really. 2.5 stars out of 5, I'm afraid. And I feel that I may have got the reasons wrong for wanting to avoid this book, but actually, I want to explain why I ended up having to read it. Sorry. So I mentioned before that I have a subscription with an independent London bookshop called the Big Green Bookshop, where I get one book a month for a year. This was the 12th and final one, and I feel that if they've sent it to me, I have to read it. So I dodged it since it came out, but ultimately it caught me, it nabbed me. So I read it, and I don't bitterly regret that I read it, because I can see to other readers, it's not a bad book. It just wasn't a book for me. So I can see to other readers that they would really get a lot out of it. I think it's a Marmite book. I think you either love it or hate it, and I'm afraid the inconsistencies of the logic of the world that she set up, and the open-endedness and the fact that she, steadfastly didn't provide any easy answers, well, not even easy, any answers, other than complete self-effacement, which I didn't buy, just meant it didn't work for me. But as I say, that gendered self-effacement and self-erasure, I think some people would find rewarding, but not for me, I'm afraid. So there you have it. It's my Friday reads. So between now and Christmas, I will be doing at least one more final Friday reads. Although next Friday is Christmas, so I'm not exactly sure when I'll get it out. And that will include my review of Read More German Lit 2020, because that will include my 15th and last book written in German originally. So I'll just look back at all 15 that I've read. And equally, my next video will be Reading Women 2020 Reading Challenge, of which this fulfills a couple of the prompts. So again, I will review how I fared with that reading challenge as a sort of self-contained video. So that will be 2 videos in the works. And then the final one that I'm anticipating will be my top 10 books of the year, which will be closer to New Year's Day when that goes out. Okay, so till next time, thanks very much.